So, let's get one thing perfectly clear. Doom: The Dark Ages is not a bad game. Far from it, in fact. Is it perfect? No. But with that said, I'm here to tell you that this is not a Doom game. I know what you're thinking. How in the hell can this not be a Doom game if it's in the title? Well, it's got gore, hellish creatures out to do you harm, and a shotgun. But that's about where the links end. But let's slow down, take a deep breath, focus our thoughts, and explain why this is not a Doom game. Let me preface this review even further by stating that I am a huge fan of Doom. In fact, I think I'd consider it my favorite gaming series of all time. If anything, definitely top 3, with Mega Man and Resident Evil. Thinking about it, yeah, number 1. I played the original Doom on an IBM Aptiva using a friend's CD that he let me borrow. I'm planning on doing a full-on Doom retrospective at some point, which I might have talked about before. Yeah, we'll get there at some point, I promise. Anyway, The Dark Ages. The story goes... Yep, hold on. We have a plot in a Doom game that attempts to be cohesive and thought-provoking and all that jazz. Usually it's just, hell is invading, make them go splat. I mean, Doom doesn't need a story more involved than this, right? I don't think so. I mean, hell, Doom Guy killed all the invading forces in the original trilogy after they killed his rabbit Daisy. He repelled the evil forces in episode 2, so he didn't have to jump into hell itself, but at that point, it was personal. And that was fine. That's all we need. A quick blurb of text to show what's going on. Doom 3 wasn't bad, even though there was a heavier reliance on story, but that game had a much heavier shift in gameplay, aiming to be more of a horror game than an action game. It did well for what it set out to be. Doom 2016 was the, shall we say, reinvention of the series. And yes, it told a tale, but it was light on facts and heavier on, go here to kill demons because this is happening. Doom Eternal again tried to give us a light story about demons invading Earth and needing to kill some hell priests, but again, who cares when you can just slay everything that moves? Come to modern day Dark Ages, which sounds kinda weird, but you know what I mean. Here, we have somewhat lengthy scenes that play out to tell a story about some prince of hell that is attacking some medieval style village, complete with modern day firearms and space age machinery. What? First off, this game is called The Dark Ages. So why are these guys looking like they come from Mass Effect? Anyway, due to the attacking creatures, an SOS goes out to the Makers, who, if I remember correctly, were featured in Doom Eternal. The Makers are holding the Doomslayer in captivity, and unleash him to the world to save King Norik and the rest of this village. It just keeps going on from there. Giant Titan-sized demons, dragons, some sort of mystical artifact that the Prince of Hell wants, blah blah blah, no one cares. This is supposed to be frigging Doom, not Dragon Effect. That's my attempt to merge Dragon Age and Mass Effect into, one title, but as you can see, it probably fell flat. If you gave me a pity chuckle, I appreciate it. So yeah, an attempt to have a heavy story in a game where you are, at its core, still just blasting Hellspawn with an interesting array of weapons. But there's one major addition to the game that really differentiates it from the prior games in the series: the shield. The Doomslayer has this piece of equipment right from the beginning of the game, and you quickly learn that in the Dark Ages, this is your lifeline. Doomguy can block most strikes and projectiles, although it will not last forever. The shield does have a finite durability, and if it breaks you cannot block until its power is recharged. In this case, the shield is never permanently gone, which is a good thing, as we'll soon find out. But in addition to simply holding the shield up to block attacks, there is also the much more important ability of parrying your enemy's attacks. Here's how this works. If you see a red projectile, this can only be blocked, done by holding L2. Parrying, on the other hand, is performed if you can correctly bring up the shield at the moment a green attack is about to harm you. Done correctly, and some adverse reactions could be seen by your opponents, depending on various runes you have equipped. These blocks and parries are the core of the new mechanics in this iteration of Doom. And you better get good at parrying quickly, because some of the higher tier enemies will throw out so many projectiles that the game starts to feel like an FPS mixed with a bullet hell shooter. I'm looking at you, Vagary Champion. Granted, as you play the game, you'll start memorizing which parts of the attacks are going to be green. For example, with the Mancubus, when it shoots its two gate-like attacks, the far right post in the first shot is always green, while the far left post of the second attack is also always green. By remembering this kind of thing, it makes defending yourself and parrying much easier, but it does tend to make the game a bit more predictable too. The shield isn't just for blocking and parrying either. There are offensive moves that you may do with it as well. You can throw the shield at your enemies, and if they are small enough, they'll simply be chopped in half. If they are any larger than, say, an imp, the shield will lodge itself into the creature and continue ripping away at it as you pellet it with shrapnel. Eventually, you can upgrade the shield so that it even ricochets off of energy shields, and of course there are plenty of times in which the opportunity to do so arises. You can also throw your shield at enemy shields that have been heated up with gunfire, making the enemy, along with everything else close by, explode, netting much needed armor fragments. You can also charge at opponents with a massive shield bash. Simply hold L2 to bring up the shield and hit R2 while targeting a distant monster, and Doomguy will zoom to this enemy and smack them in their skull with the hard metal. This is super satisfying to do. There are also areas of the game in which you need to do the shield bash through weak walls, smashing your way through to new areas. If you see a green emblem, it's required for progression, but there are also subdued blue emblems that typically hide secret areas. Regardless, unleashing your inner Kool-Aid man through these walls is absolutely fun to do. Here's the thing, I don't mind the shield mechanics. They are well done and can be picked up easily enough. And if you suck at it, there are a multitude of difficulty sliders to make the timing of parries much more fair or challenging, depending on your intended challenge level. But this doesn't belong in a Doom game. Doom games are all about shooting Hellspawn with badass weapons. I never in 40 plus years of my life have been playing Doom and thought, you know what would make this better? A shield. I've been perfectly fine simply moving around the battlefield, dodging fireballs and throwing rockets downrange. It worked great in the originals, it worked great in Doom 2016, and it worked great in Doom Eternal. So why did we have to change the formula that worked? In addition, I'm not a bullet hell guy. Granted, as I've said, Doom the Dark Ages never gets to the point of full-on bullet hell, but at times, it sure as hell feels like it. Many times I lost track of where my enemies are. You'll be attacked from the rear a lot, and I can't even tell you how many times I started taking damage from something and couldn't even determine where the hell it came from. I do enjoy the frantic nature of most Doom battles, but when you start losing control of the battle, it just doesn't feel like Doom. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if it does. It does in my head, but we're not done yet. Let's talk about the weapons. Of course, you start with a standard combat shotgun, a staple of the series, and it feels great. You get about a dozen other firearms, and the arsenal is probably one of the better parts of the game. Each of the 6 or so weapons, minus the chain shot, has 2 iterations, swapped by pressing square. For example, you could be running around with the combat shotgun and press square to swap to the much more potent double-barreled shotgun. The fast but recoil-heavy accelerator can be switched to a slower but more accurate cycler. Probably my favorite example is the pulverizer, a gun that chews up skulls and spits out the pieces in a wide arc, tearing apart a lot of enemies at one time. Later in the game, you get the Ravager, which takes the same gun but concentrates the bone fragments into a smaller area, really bringing down any demons with ease. I've said that the chain shot was the exception, but truthfully, that's okay, as I thought this weapon kinda sucked. Sure, it can take down armor quickly, but it's so slow that it's just easier to bring out the super shotgun or rocket launcher instead. You also have some melee weapons. Not surprisingly, due to the era this game takes place in, there is no chainsaw. Instead, you start with a gauntlet, allowing you to punch enemies to replenish ammo reserves. You eventually get a flail, which can later set enemies on fire, and a mace, which is incredibly slow and limited in charges, but tops off all of your guns at once. The mace, like the chain shot, was far too slow to be useful. The gauntlet is fine, but the flail is what I stuck with. Also, the way melee works is that you typically have 3 charges. Using melee will deplete one of these, and to replace it, you simply pick up ammo pickups. Being that you hold a shield, I have one question. Why do I not have a massive sword instead? I want a sword to decapitate enemies endlessly. We missed the mark here, guys. Another trademark of the series is the BFG. This bad boy has been the room-clearing masterpiece since day one. Well, It's not here. Instead, we get the BFC, the Ballistic Force Crossbow. I cringed a little bit when I saw this, however, it acts just like the beast we all know and love, so I got over it real quick. Just like before, you have limited shots with it, and it will do hefty damage to anything in your way. Bolts must be found around the map, as enemies will not drop them. So as in prior games, its use must be conserved until you really need it. The weapons, as before, can be upgraded, but this time, they are not done with weapon points or anything like that. Instead, we scour the world for gold, rubies, and wraithstones. Interacting with the Sentinel Shrine will allow you to purchase increased firepower for the weapon of your choice. Typically, the first few upgrades can be bought with gold, with the more interesting and game-changing improvements being traded for the rubies. The final upgrade for each firearm is always purchased with a Wraithstone, which unlocks the Weapon Mastery Challenge. Unfortunately, unlike the prior games, these Mastery Challenges do not improve the weapon any further. Instead, completing them simply gets you a new skin for that firearm. Skins that, from what I can see, don't really change the look of the weapon now all that much. Sure, I completed them anyway because most of them weren't hard to finish, but I personally couldn't give two craps about weapon skins. You can also purchase upgrades for your shield and melee weapons. They use the same gold, rubies, and wraithstones as your weapons, so you need to decide how to prioritize your upgrades. Shockingly, I ended up improving my shield and flail first, after that increasing the Ravager and shotgun. The ability to stun enemies after a ranged parry, as well as engulfing creatures in flames with a melee strike, just had immediate appeal to me. Stunning enemies used to lead up to a nice, messy glory kill. Doom 2016 started this, and although they still occur in Eternal, to me they just weren't as jaw-droppingly horrific. In Doom the Dark Ages, well, you probably guessed it, but they're for the most part gone. Enemies will still be stunned, with a shrinking purple circle around them denoting the amount of time you have to finish them off. Most of the time, though, they're simply just bashed apart with a shield. Sure, if you jump and perform the kill, you'll usually split the enemy into two halves with the shield saw. I believe there might be others performed if you approach from the side or rear, but normally, I just run up to them and hit R3 or perform the long-range shield bash to finish the creature off. It's just a shame that there's not as much emphasis on the glory kills like the games before it. Does this make me sadistic? Maybe, but I like to think that when playing violent video games in which you kill creatures from hell, tearing them apart in chunks is the definition of imparting God's wrath on these unholy monsters. Although you still need to find the gold and such for gear upgrades, the stat boosts have taken a major step backwards in terms on what order you wanted to improve them in. Now, health, armor, and ammo maximums can only be increased by defeating creatures known as leaders. These are just slightly buffed normal enemies that have a shield around them. In order to lower this shield, you must defeat enemies around the leader to break its morale. When this is done, the enemy can be killed by normal means, and performing a glory kill on it will rip a ruined orb out of its chest that when destroyed increases the maximum health, armor, or ammo for one of the weapon's types. Most of these are found as you play the game, with only a small amount actually being hidden from normal progression. I don't hate it, but as with a lot of other things about Dark Ages, it just feels like a step backwards. Are there power-ups in Dark Ages? There is, but power-up, as in singular. Well, unless you count the Megasphere, which maxes out your life and armor, but I don't count that. Instead, the lone power-up of the game is the Berserk Orb, which doesn't exactly do what you'd expect. No, you don't get to run up to enemies and punch them in the face for one-hit knockouts and instant glory kills. Instead, you just get infinite ammo for a short time. You know, we need to talk about this world a bit more, as it really confuses me. I've already mentioned that a setting is a medieval-style castle with sci-fi spaceships, spears and energy rifles, chainmail and space-age armor. Doomguy has a cape made out of fur, which kind of looks to me like it belonged more in the Far Cry Primal universe. You also have an alien race that have the Doomslayer imprisoned. Oh, and dragons. Because Dark Ages needed dragons. I like dragons. I can see dragons in Doom. But why does the Doomguy need to be riding his own personal dragon? It even has a name. Sarat. I like it. And the dragon looks pretty badass, with it being practically a half machine anyway. But these segments are incredibly boring. Riding around the dragon is easy enough, but the Doomguy has a chainsaw attached to its saddle. You can't even get Sarat to breathe fire on the Hellspawn. Instead, you hold L2 to lock onto an enemy, and just hold R2 to fire the chain gun. The enemy will fire attacks, and you press circle in a direction to dodge out of its way. That's it. You can't actively move around in these battles. In fact, the only time you can fly around freely and shoot is when you are chasing down the optional hell ships that fly around, netting you gold if you can destroy them in time. Other than that, stationary battles while aboard a dragon is all you get. Super lame, guys. If you're gonna give me a dragon ride, at least make it interesting. Also, for some stupid reason, there are mechs. Again, the segments in which you pilot these things, called Atlands, are brief, so they exist solely to break up the normal run-and-gun action that you are probably accustomed to in a Doom game. But to me, these Atlan segments are again somewhat uninteresting, although not quite as bad as the Surratt sections. Atlans mostly use melee attacks, with R2 acting as a punch and R1 being a quick palm strike. You do get limited access to weaponry in scripted areas, but for the most part, you're just introducing Fist to Titan-sized demonic creatures. And at one point in the game, you go hand to hand with a Cthulhu Old One in an old-fashioned punch-out battle. See, I wish I was kidding, but all it amounts to is punching while dodging the enemy's attacks. With these change-ups aside, at least the music is still pretty good, if strangely subdued. It's a shame that Mick Gordon, the composer from the prior two games, didn't return for the Dark Ages, but the peeps who created the music here did a pretty good job. There's a lot of atmospheric stuff, but when the battles kick in, you'll know it. It's just really weird that after a while you'll stop hearing the music and only really get sound effects. Yeah, the music is still playing, but it's just so soft compared to everything else that you'll wonder if it got muted somehow. No idea why id decided to go with this route. Minor spoiler alert coming up, so stop here if you're concerned about a setting you encounter. Okay, warning issued. Speaking of Cthulhu, yeah, the second half of the game features a heavier focus on this mythos. Sure, you still have Hellspawn trying to rip and tear your body apart, but instead of fighting in this mystical area of medieval castles and space-age firearms, you rampage in areas inspired by the tentacled ones. Truthfully though, these areas are more interesting to look at. The ruined city is fine and all, but many of these levels are set in somewhat bland open zones, where you have objectives presented to you, and you simply run from one area to another, pausing only to partake in the occasional encounter or solve a small puzzle to uncover a secret area. A lot of the game's 22 chapters take place in outdoor areas, but everything is awash in boring browns and grays, so no eye candy here. At least when you get to the Cthulhu areas, you'll see more color. Purple skies, dark blue creatures. Hell, there's even a few chapters in which you're literally swallowed by an old one and need to find your way out in the most explosive way possible. I do admit that I enjoyed the new design on the Cacodemon, with them having a delightfully Cthulhu spin. Sure, they're now much more dangerous, but that makes it more fun. This actually brings me to the enemy designs. Typically, Doom games have always had the same enemies, just redesigned in new ways. Imps, zombified soldiers, Barons of Hell, Cacodemons, Revenants, they're all usually here with different abilities. The same is true for the most part here, but at the same time, there seems to be a lack of new, interesting enemies. There are a few different types of imps and a lot of different Barons of Hell with different abilities, including one annoying bastard that is cloaked and likes to spring surprise attacks on you. Pinkies now have riders that need to be knocked off before the demon itself is killed. The Revenants may have changed the most, as they can now coat themselves in some sort of armor that prevents them from taking damage for a short bit, unless you can parry back their green skulls. That's right, they don't fire homing missiles, but skulls. It's kinda cool, but at the same time, why change it? Cyber demons have been demoted from bosses to a somewhat rare but standard foe. They are also missing their signature rockets, instead wielding a simple machine gun as an arm. I get it. This is supposed to be in the past before many of the other games in the series, but why not change the rockets to fireballs? I also understand that the reason this is probably changed this way is to help with the new shield mechanics. It just goes back to my thoughts of why fix what ain't broken, you know? Not all is old and dialed back, though. Those Vagary champions, a welcome throwback to an old Doom 3 boss, can be annoying as hell to fight. Lots of damage orbs and acid pools are extremely dangerous to your health. It's in these fights in which I realized that I was taking damage from seemingly nowhere to find out that it was probably just lingering acid on the ground. There was also the humanoid creatures with the massive sword and shield, a reference to one of the most annoying enemies in Doom Eternal. I hated this guy then, and I hated fighting him now. He's only vulnerable at specific times, and will often bring up a shield that renders him completely immune to whatever you throw at him. Like everything else, he's not difficult to fight, but more annoying, because when he is susceptible to harm, he's probably rushing you with an onslaught of sword attacks, requiring you to quickly parry and shoot between swings. It's just a shame that the final boss is, for the most part, a pushover. I'm not going to spoil it here, but just know that there are multiple forms, and they don't really get much harder. I may sound like I'm heavily ragging on the game, and let's be real here, I am, but I must reiterate that I am reviewing this game as a Doom game. If we removed the Doom name, we'd have a great shooter, and yes, I did have fun playing it. Sure, the dragon parts were boring, and the Atlan chapters, although somewhat enjoyable for a change of pace, just felt out of place here. But looking at the game's core mechanics, Doom: The Dark Ages is fully playable and fun. Yes, the shield mechanics take some time to get used to. Yes, there are a lot of open chapters in which you're doing a lot of running back and forth to get to your objective. Yes, I spent a lot of time staring at the auto map to find each and every secret, but the base game is still fun. The weapons are as violent and brutal as ever. As divided as I am with the shield, I loved introducing it to an imp's face from 20 yards away, or smashing through a shabby wall to enter a new zone. The mission objectives give you extra challenges to complete in every stage, so there's enough content to keep you content for 15 plus hours. And it took me about 20 hours to get the Platinum Trophy. But with as much fun as I've had, again, this just does not feel like a Doom game. So as a Doom series fanatic, I can sum it up as follows. This game is highly recommendable, but with a small caveat. Also, one last final note. Is it me, or does the Doom guy kind of look like Samus from Metroid Fusion? Final score? You know, this game was very difficult for me to score. I'm really torn by my thoughts of it, so I'm going to give this game an exception of my normal no-halvesies rule and say 5.5 out of 7. As a Doom game, I give it a 5 out of 7. As an FPS game with the Doom name dropped, a 6 out of 7. So yeah, 5.5 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.
Payment required.